words, rituals, deeds, practices, and performance. But is there an iteration of such practice in a religious context? If so, are we talking about it within the community? The short answer is implicitly yes. Look, for example, at the number of events that Jakara puts on to encourage people to think critically about the emotional responses they have to some of the tangible physical things that are happening to our communities. But the point remains, are we explicitly talking about healing in our community, or are we unfocused on it as an intangible mental concern that's cast aside as weakness that requires no specific attention? Related, are we truly healing past trauma? If so, how does one do that when it appears that we have not yet healed from the trauma of partition, or the trauma of 1984, or the injustices that have been committed against the Sikh community since then? Hate crimes that have been committed against our community, which existed even before 9/11, are yet another instance of trauma. How critically can we use this understanding to react and to influence how we react and heal today? On the flip side, are we focused on showing and proving and affirming our identity as a way to assert agency and thereby assert power? Are healing and the assertion of power mutually exclusive things? Do we view this power play as a way to protect ourselves against future trauma? If so, are we actually engaging in defense measures that look to the future? I.e., if you knew who I really was as a Sikh and what I really believed in, maybe you wouldn't do this to me. But the problem is this. Do the lessons of 1984 teach us that? Do the lessons of 9/11, Oak Creek, and the many hate crimes committed against Gurdwaras and Sikh people tell us otherwise? If we thought about it at this meta level, the question of why, would it affect the way we respond? Would it help us to believe and understand that this is not just about us? We say that mistaken identity is something we suffer uniquely. It is unique to us because we are a minority among minorities with a complicated history and little political power. But think about this critically. How is our response different from a black child that puts his hands up and says, "Don't shoot"? Is that not him saying, "You, police officer, have mistaken my identity. You think you are protecting the world from me, from my danger. You think I'm evil, my hands are up, but you are wrong about my identity. Don't shoot me"? Until we realize that the phenomenon of mistaken identity is a tool of gendered white supremacy used not just to create a hierarchy, but also to encourage us to stay in it and reinstantiate it by creating differences amongst us and encouraging us to fight for power within an existing structure, we will not dismantle it. I maintain each year at Sikholars that we must realize that the racialization of black and brown people is interrelated. The same phenomenon that we face are those that we recreate. But this year, I hope we will go a step farther and evaluate all structures and ways of thinking and knowing, including our own. Why, for example, are Sikhs in the U.S. engaging in sex-selective abortions? How have Sikhs in diasporic communities and enclaves, like New York, created community the way they have? Why is there a pluralistic reality even within the Sikh faith? And what is the lived reality, interpretation, and representation of femininity in the Sikh community? And how do we connect to the homeland tangibly through the right of citizenship and intangibly through art and expression? These are all questions that I don't necessarily have the answers to. I'm just encouraging that we all think about them collectively together throughout the rest of the day. Thank you so much on behalf of Jakara for being here. We appreciate your presence. It's electric, and your dedication to thinking and critical analysis is truly inspiring. We're so honored to have you here today. And we're very excited to hear your questions. Before we begin, we have a few announcements. First, we are lucky to have A.K. Sandhu here, who's a photographer that's starting a movement, a photography-based movement, encouraging folks who wear religious articles of clothing to get their pictures taken and sort of contribute to a project of religious articles of clothing. So if you could get in touch with her, you could raise your hand in the back, A.K. She's back, so feel free to get in touch with her if you're interested, or pick up one of her flyers throughout the day, which are spread about in the room. Second, we have Deep Singh, who, as you guys know, is a force within the Bay Area Sikh community and the Northern California Sikh community. He's one of the key founders of Sikholars and very involved in Jakara, and he is going to be up next to introduce the next speaker.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you everybody for joining us this morning. I have the key privilege to announce our sort of keynote speaker for the morning. And the following person I get to introduce is actually probably one of a very important and probably one of the key leading scholars in Sikh studies today. It is actually through also the co-sponsorship and the support of the UC Santa Cruz Sarabjit Singh Arora Sikh and Punjabi Studies Chair that we're actually been able to have this event. And I get to present Professor Nirvikar Singh in just a minute. Now this Sikh studies as a field is in sort of constant disarray, whether it be because of factionalization, different ideologies, or even the community feeling that despite large amounts of money that have actually gone into creating Sikh chairs, has the community actually received sort of its money's worth? What are its expectations, or what are the expectations we should be having from these chairs? And in some ways, the keynote speaker is going to address all of these, but also give sort of, for those that are less familiar with the topic, lay of the general understanding of what exactly some of the key issues are, some of the key concerns are, and ways that these can be addressed. So without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Professor Nirvikar Singh, the chair of the Sarabjit Singh Arora at UC Santa Cruz Sikh and Punjab Studies.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I'm really grateful to Jakara and to Mandeep in particular for inviting me. And it's really an honor to be speaking to Jakara. I've attended previous Jakara conferences when I've been able to, when I've been in town, and been very impressed with what the organization is doing with Sikholars, and also I think at the level of community engagement. And Mandeep and I have been having an ongoing conversation about I think how we can create a partnership between academia and non-academic organizations or more community organizations like Jakara to provide, I think, support to the Sikh community. And as Jasmine highlighted, the travails of the Sikh community in the United States in a post-9/11 world are just one example, I think, of the challenges facing the world as a whole, and Sikhs have experienced difficult, challenging situations in India, where there's no issue of mistaken identity, right? Who's Sikh, and I think it's very important to keep those larger issues in mind. With respect to global equality and respect for differences in a global context. So with that, I'm going to say that actually my focus is going to be much, much narrower. So I'm going to give you basically an ivory tower perspective. And you might at the end of it say, so what, these are just little squabbles among academics. But I think we have to realize that universities, and in particular the American university system, is a knowledge production machine. And that knowledge production has lasting consequences. So it's very important, I think, for the community to understand what's going on with Sikh studies in Western academia. And that's the title of my talk, The State of Sikh Studies in Western Academia. I have a paper which is too long to read out, but I'll read out sections of it and summarize others. The impetus for this has come actually over, I think, a long lifetime. I'm obviously much older than all the Sikholar presenters, so I feel a little bit of a dinosaur, and I'm really looking forward to the excellent presentations later. But actually, my engagement, besides, so as I grew up as a Sikh in India, and of course it struck me that Sikhs are a marginal community, and that representation is marginal, in the history textbooks, in schools, and so on. And so as an academic, I'm an academic economist by training, I was always interested in the representation of Sikhs in the United States, the representation of Sikhs in America. And when I came to UC Berkeley to do a PhD in economics, by sheer coincidence, Hugh MacLeod, who I'm sure you've all heard of, happened to be visiting Berkeley for the year. So I audited his class on the Sikhs and got introduced to the MacLeod view of the Sikh religion and Sikh history. And I think that was the beginning of my formal academic engagement with Sikh studies, which has continued on the side throughout my career as an economist. So I'm in my 6th year holding the chair at UC Santa Cruz. It was actually only endowed at UCSC 5 years ago. So it's been, it seems like a long time, but actually I feel like it's just sort of the beginning of the task that needs to be done. When you hear me comment on some of my Sikh chair colleagues, you'll see why I think we have a monumental task ahead of us. So I'll read a little bit and then comment. So Sikh and Punjabi studies apparently has an impressive presence in North American academia with 8 endowed chairs and a wide range of scholarly activities. Some of these chairs are at major research universities with strong departments of religious studies or centers of South Asian studies. Arguably, though, the field remains precarious in certain ways, both with respect to its position within academia and with respect to the Sikh community, its object of study, and typically the funding source. So I'm going to provide a basis for this claim of precariousness, discussing broader asymmetries in the production and reproduction of knowledge in those parts of Western academia that encompass or influence Sikh and Punjabi studies. I'm going to examine the relationship of the field to South Asian studies, religious studies, and aspects of postmodernism, as well as to underlying ideologies such as Hindutva. I'm going to use examples from 5 topics that have been salient or are emerging as important in Sikh and Punjabi studies. And I could have chosen more. 5 is a nice number. I mean, it has significance, right, for us. The origins of Sikhism, the later evolution of the tradition, diversity in belief and practice. Number 4 is the Sikh diaspora. And number 5 is the impact of colonialism on Sikh belief. And you'll see that these are interrelated. One can't really look at them completely independently, but I've sort of cut it this way. So I've given this talk once before, and there I started an overview of history, which I will completely skip for this audience. But interestingly enough, actually Sikh history is often not that well understood, and some of what is surprising is that some of the basic issues actually boil down to fundamental interpretations of our history within an academic context. Okay, so I'm going to now give you my methodological frame. And my fundamental hypothesis is that there are hidden asymmetries of power in the production and reproduction of academic, quote, academic knowledge, particularly in the context of Sikh and Punjabi studies. Michel Foucault, a very well-known French thinker, has the following statement: the exercise of power perpetually creates knowledge, and conversely, knowledge constantly induces effects of power. And this is really where I think academia is an important site for Sikhs to pay attention to, as well as everything else we do with civil society and politics and so on. Now, this statement gets quoted often by academics, but they actually ignore its scope. And I would actually characterize Sikh studies in North American academia as being subalternized under South Asian studies in ways that privilege particular understandings of the region's past, especially with respect to, quote, classical Indian thought. A subsidiary hypothesis is that there are asymmetries of language and economic power in ways that have not been fully recognized, even in analyses such as that of Talal Asad. He's a very prominent Islamic thinker, but I think even he doesn't take the argument far enough. I mean, for him, the argument is, comparing, he uses the example of a European academic studying a North African tribesman. And there, of course, there's obviously a difference in, so many asymmetries in terms of economic and cultural signifiers and so on, that it's kind of easy to make that case. The point being that it's difficult for the academic to put himself or herself in the position of the object of study. But what I'm saying is that this kind of asymmetry applies even in much less obvious contexts of asymmetry, where I, as a scholar of Sikh studies, if I'm interacting with a scholar of South Asian studies who knows nothing about Sikhism, the same kinds of asymmetries can be at work. So basically I'm talking not about tribes like the Berbers, but I'm talking about academic tribes. There are two additional subsidiary hypotheses. The first is the role of politics in academic discourse and knowledge production. And by this I mean not academic politics, which obviously is rampant, but identity politics from outside academia. In the case of Sikh studies, two chairholders in the field at US universities were, for a time at least, co-opted by an organization with the clear purpose of promoting a particular Hindutva ideology with respect to South Asian culture and traditions. This co-optation was facilitated by the awarding of significant grants from private sources. The importance of money in influencing knowledge production is not a new idea, but its significance in this case is worth exploring, especially when it comes on top of other asymmetries. A final hypothesis is methodological, and here I may be completely not making sense to non-academics, but what I want to do is say a little bit, and this will come out in some of my remarks, about the use of postmodern ideas in Sikh studies. And this has become quite popular among certain writers in Sikh studies, including those like Harjot Oberoi or Richard Fox, who are not themselves postmodernists, but they will appeal to Foucault and Bourdieu, and sometimes use the same analysis of the continental academic to reach completely different conclusions about Sikh history. So for me, there's a somewhat of a fragility in terms of that methodology, and I think the fragility arises because of a neglect of careful reading of the fundamental sources of Sikh history. So the facts matter a lot in these cases. Okay, I've realized I've probably exhausted more than half my time, so I'll just talk very in summary form about the 5 hypotheses. So the first is the Sant hypothesis and the origins of Sikhism. Okay, so for Sikhs, I think it's unquestionable that Guru Nanak was the founder of Sikhism, and this was a unique, original set of insights that he provided, divine revelation for believers and so on. And what I want to surface is that this actually is often challenged in academia and even by writers in Sikh studies. So the origins of this hypothesis go back actually to MacLeod's dissertation, which was published as Guru Nanak and the Sikh Religion. And there he actually says the pattern evolved by Guru Nanak is a reworking of the Sant synthesis. which does not depart from Sant sources as far as its fundamental components are concerned. So what is a Sant in this academic discourse? It's somebody who is basically a nirgun bhakt or bhagat. Right? Nirgun meaning different from the Vaishnavas who would worship avatars of Vishnu and so on. When I looked into this, so I was surprised when I first encountered this in MacLeod's work. And when I looked into it, it turns out that this actually is a 20th century creation of basically Hindu writers. What is even more surprising is that the term Sant is used pervasively in South Asian studies to describe a subset of Nirgun Bhakti. What is amazing is that this term is a 20th century creation. So it's completely ahistorical, it has political overtones, and yet Western academia continues to use this term. So aside from the fact that I think it's very easy to argue that Guru Nanak was not part of the Sant tradition, it's also possible to make a strong case that there was no Sant tradition, that this is just a creation, a modern creation. So this is important because, again, I think it gets back to issues of Sikh identity. And yes, it's true that we are one among many minorities. There are issues of inequality and injustice that a lot of people in the world face. But ultimately also we are Sikhs, and for me this study and this paper is really about making sure that the academic understanding of who Sikhs are is on solid foundations. Okay, so I've actually written a whole paper on this, and I can send that to you as well. This paper also I can make available to anybody. The second issue I want to tackle briefly is the so-called invention of Sikhism by the Singh Sabha. This thesis is associated with Harjot Singh Oberoi, who held a Sikh chair at University of British Columbia, and subsequently, because of protests from the Sikh community, he kind of withdrew from the field. But he continues to exert an influence, most prominently from through his book. So again, I want to make this point that once something gets into print and circulates within academia, it has a life of its own. So even if Harjot Oberoi says, "Oh, I'm not doing Sikh studies," his book continues to influence people. It has, for example, 400 citations in Google Scholar, which is pretty high for any book on Sikh studies. It's a 20-year-old book. So basically what Harjot Oberoi, and I'm going to summarize, and I don't think this is too much of a caricature, but what Oberoi says is, look, there was no single Sikh tradition. It was like anything goes until the Singh Sabha came and created a unified tradition. To make this claim, I would argue that Oberoi completely distorts history. He also uses language in a way that is not objective. He says very early on in the book, well, this is just obviously one interpretation among many. But again, I think the problem is that interpretation is the one that gets a lot of academic attention. Just to give you a sense of, again, this theme of asymmetries, the book came out in 1994. By 1997, Jagtar Singh Grewal, who is the foremost scholar of the history of the Sikhs, he's published, the Sikhs of the Punjab in the Cambridge History of the Sikhs series. He wrote actually what seemed to be a devastating critique of Oberoi's work, academic critique. If you look on Google Scholar, Grewal's work has 0 citations because he published it in India. He was based in India. He doesn't write. His prose is not as fancy as Oberoi's. It's very, very sort of ordinary prose, but the facts are all there. And they really discredit Oberoi's thesis. But who's reading Grewal? This is a problem. Number 3. diversity in belief and practice. Okay? So this is actually very prominent now in Sikh studies in Western academia. My fellow Sikh studies chair at UC Riverside, Professor Pashora Singh, had a conference on millennial Sikhs last year, I think, and he was basically saying, well, millennial Sikhs are doing whatever they want, and that's great. Here's a quote from him. It's from Pashora. The current academic discourse is, however, still theoretically limited, as the majority of scholarly works follow with little deviation what we may call the meta-narrative of the Khalsa, and note other ways of being Sikh as deviation from the, quote, normative Sikh trajectory. This is Pashora Singh. Then he goes on to say, there is thus an urgent need to focus on the theme of expressing Sikhness or Sikhi by integrating text with practice. That's fine. An inclusive tactic which allows the multiplicity of Sikh voices throughout the Sikh world today and throughout Sikhism's history to be heard without privileging any singular one. Such an approach allows us to view the extraordinary diversity of the Sikh tradition by looking not just at Sikh texts, but also at Sikh practices. Through this shift alone, we will be able to avoid the trap of essentialism and reimagine the colorful diversity of the Sikh tradition in the 21st century at the global level. That's the end of the quote. Sounds really nice. There's some fundamental flaws, though, with Pashora Singh's view, because what he's saying is basically anything goes. You can be a Sikh any way you want to be, and it's all fine. Now, I certainly recognize that there is a huge amount of diversity among the Sikh community. There are 20 million of us, right? Depending on how you define diversity, there can be 20 million different ways of practicing Sikhi. That's not the point. The point is that any tradition, especially a religious tradition which has some kind of moral or normative core, has to have some standards. Otherwise, what defines being a Sikh? Nothing. So why is Pashora Singh writing this? Pashora Singh himself is a devout Amritdhari Sikh. So he's writing this, and I'll use this word very explicitly, he is pandering to a particular audience. And this is a problem. So when you have a chair of Sikh studies pandering to a particular audience that really wants to have an idea of, well, religion, and this goes back, what is he contrasting diversity to? He's contrasting it to essentialism. So what he's saying is, look, if you have some kind of normative beliefs and say, okay, this is how you should be a good Sikh, then you are being an essentialist. Sorry, this is just very poor scholarship. It's fundamentally flawed. I guess I'm departing quite a lot from my paper, which is somewhat more circumspect in what it says. But I have other examples from this, and I want to use this example, though, and this also applies to MacLeod, that what I'm criticizing is not individuals. Pashora Singh has done some fine work on the Sikh community and so on. What I'm criticizing is the quality of certain academic arguments. And just to give you an example, another scholar, Lou Fenech, has written a book on martyrdom, which I think is actually very flawed. I'm not going to go into that here. He talks about martyrdom in the Sikh tradition. It's actually a very problematic book. But on the Khalsa, here's what Lou Fenech says. So significant was the Khalsa to the early Sikh imagination that it was believed to have been often revered by the Guru himself. The Khalsa, in certain texts, not only inherited the spiritual mantle or robe of the Guru, but was even metaphysically equated with him, forming the basis of what would become the doctrine of Guru Panth, the mystical presence of the divine within the community of the Khalsa. If the Khalsa is so important in Sikh tradition and belief, then how can Pashora Singh say, oh, it doesn't matter, you can do whatever you want? So here's what I'm pointing out, that Fenech is actually, I think, providing a good academic analysis, which is I think, appropriate in this case. Number 4, the Sikh diaspora. Here, actually, this is a huge topic, one that really needs a lot of attention. Just to give you an example, it's not in the paper, but I've been doing some work on Indian Americans, and in that context, looking at Americans, of course. Half of the Sikhs in the United States live in California. When was the last major study done, book-length study of Sikhs in California? The work for that was done around 1980. Over 3 decades have passed since there's been any major study of Sikhs in California. So that's a slight digression there. What I want to focus, though, on is, again, there is a lot of work on the diaspora, but it is, again, sometimes problematic. I'll give you 2 examples. One is the work of Brian Axel, The Nation's Tortured Body. Again, he really focuses on the diaspora, and his thesis is that, in some sense, the consciousness of a Sikh diaspora is really the result of 1984. Now, 1984 was a very traumatic period for the Sikh community. Obviously, not just in Punjab. I was in Delhi at the time. I got to see it firsthand. It obviously had a big impact on the diaspora. It surprisingly continues to do so. When I talk to my students, they can tell me about relatives, who went through 1984 and its aftermath. So for them, it's still personal. But what I want to say is that what Axel is arguing is that this idea of Sikh sovereignty and the idea of a Sikh nation is somehow, especially in the diaspora, is just a creation or a result of 1984. Again, from my perspective, this completely ignores Sikh history, which really involves a struggle for autonomy and some aspects of sovereignty. I'm going to go over this very quickly. I'll skip the rest of it. But I want to draw your attention to the work of Robin Cohen. He's a professor at Oxford. In 1997, he wrote a book on global diasporas, and he has some very interesting comparisons of Sikhs and Zionists, for example, in the context of a struggle for a homeland. But what does he say about the Sikhs? Here's a couple of sentences from the paragraph. He's talking about the masculine militaristic ideology of Sikhism. This last feature seems to have arisen from the forcible conversion to Sikhism of another Punjabi-speaking people, the Jats, over the period 1563 to 1606. Apparently, the Guru at the time, Guru Arjan Dev, thought that proselytizing was best done in the form of a holy war. This is an Oxford professor in a book on global diasporas, writing stuff which is even, it's just the mind boggles that this has been produced in a scholarly work and has been reproduced in the 2nd edition of that work. And my colleagues in Sikh studies apparently were not even aware of this. My final point is on Sikhs and colonialism. And here, this is a very, very, I think, complicated point. The 2 people associated with this academic view are, again, 2 Sikh studies chair, Arvind Pal Mander and Balbinder Bhogal. And what they are saying, I've got lots of quotes, I've gone through their work many, many times. What they're saying is a little different from Oberoi, because Oberoi says there was really no, well-defined Sikh community before the Singh Sabha movement of the late 19th and early 20th century. Mander says, oh yes, there was a well-defined Sikh community, but people now have forgotten what it was because of the Singh Sabha. The Singh Sabha completely distorted how what Sikh beliefs were before they came around. So what Mander and Bhogal are basically saying is that 20 million Sikhs, or I don't know, maybe not 20 million, but the majority of Sikhs are completely misunderstanding what the gurus wrote and practiced. Again, the mind boggles. This is, again, when I've talked to another of my Sikh studies, couple of my Sikh studies colleagues, they say, well, the book is difficult to read. The book is difficult to read because there's a lot of regurgitation of Derrida and Foucault, and which really adds nothing to the basic misrepresentation of the history of Sikh beliefs. So let me conclude. This has actually been a very tough paper to write because when you're writing academically, you want to sort of keep it dispassionate, but sometimes I get really upset with the quality of the scholarship that I've been reading. There's also complexity of underlying theoretical issues and multiple asymmetries of power at work. One example, actually, I haven't gone into, but my wife actually is dealing with it, is the study of Sikh sacred music. And I think she's doing Inderjeet Kaur is doing some very fine work. But again, I think coming up against some of these, challenges from scholars who don't want to pursue the study of the Sikhs in what I see as an objective way. So I want to say my arguments have nothing to do with scholarship versus belief or insiders versus outsiders. Some of the problems I've highlighted for you actually come from insiders. Or tradition versus modernity. This is the big red herring. This is often used, this is what Peshora Singh says, oh, well, if you don't agree with me on diversity, that's because you're a traditionalist, you're essentialist, and so on. I'm not seeking to resurrect any essentialist approach or deny the possibility of differing interpretations or subjectivities. There is a lot of argument and diversity among the Sikhs. What I've tried to do is deconstruct the process of knowledge production in Sikh studies in Western academia to suggest that there are some unappealing features to this process. Okay? So this subaltern status comes about because of the need to appeal to certain audiences. And you might be saying, well, why does this guy standing in front of you not have the same imperative? And in that sense, I've been incredibly fortunate because having been a successful economist for 3 decades, I was given the opportunity to hold this chair. So I don't have to respond to anybody. Nobody is going to decide my tenure. Nobody's going to decide my promotions in Sikh studies. So I can actually speak the truth, I think, in ways that some of these people are not willing to. So recognizing the possibility of multiple understandings and narratives does not mean that every narrative is as valid as any other. Ignoring important strands or periods of history, creating ahistorical categories like the Sants, arguing by loose analogy, choosing facts selectively, and other methodological transgressions are real transgressions in my view, and not just a matter of my interpretation is as good as anyone else's. So what I'm saying is that I think the Sikh studies chairs spread across North America have to do a better job. They have a responsibility to the community, and it's not just about glorifying the community. We have to recognize that the community has issues. I think, again, going back to Sikhs in California, one of the things that has struck me in looking at the community is how diverse it is socioeconomically. One of my co-authors on this study of Indian Americans is a geographer. He can look at census tracts down to the minutest detail. So what is the poorest community of Indian Americans in the United States? It happens to be a small community of Sikhs in Central California. If you look at language groups, Telugu, Tamil, Punjabi, Gujarati, Hindi, what language group is the worst off in terms of income and higher education? It's Punjabi speakers. So I think there are a lot of issues to be studied, not just in terms of saying, we're a wonderful people, but understanding, who we are, how we're making our way in this country. And really, Hindutva is also a challenge. As I said, 2 of these chairs were recently happy to take money from and be on the board of the Dharma Academy of North America. This acronym DANAM was postulated a unified view of the Dharma traditions of South Asia, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism. But digging deeper, if you looked at their website, it didn't take you more than a couple of clicks to see what they're saying is that it's all in the Vedas. And it was only when some members of the Sikh community protested that Sikhism disappeared from the list, and these two chairs quietly relinquished their positions, but not before one of them has gone on the internet and said, well, members of the Sikh community are gundas. And I asked him to take that down, but he refused. So he's still taking funding from one of the related organizations. This is also an issue at UC Irvine, where academics have been, worried about what is happening with the two of the Hindu studies chairs being funded there at UC Irvine, and they're worried about, whether the Sikh chair is also going to be infected by that. And it's been a process to try and make sure that doesn't happen. So again, this is, I think what I'm saying to you is that this matters for the Sikh community. The production of knowledge within Western universities is vital for the community. But also what I want to say to the community is that the approach to this cannot take the form of personal attacks. You have to look at the scholarship and the quality of the scholarship. Now, if you're a community member, that shouldn't be your job to do fresh scholarship. It's the job of scholars. And I think really the greatest burden is going to be on young scholars of Sikh studies like the ones who are going to present today. And I know I've sounded very pessimistic and frustrated, but really I think there's a lot of hope in these younger scholars, and I'm really looking forward to today's presentations. Thank you so much. Oh. Sorry, I got a little bit too passionate.
No. It was great. Hopefully it inspires some commentary specifically from some of our panelists.
Yes, so
Can you repeat the question for those that might not have heard it?
yes. Who are the audiences that these to? I think one of them is other scholars, right? Who's going to decide your tenures and promotions, right? So because Sikh studies is so tiny, it's typically going to be other South Asian scholars. And I'll take the example of hypothesis, right? MacLeod actually did not come up with that. That has been entrenched in Western academia before MacLeod. But if you trace the origins of the term, it actually comes from the work of Pitambar Bartwal in 1936. Somehow it found its way, some Western academic said, oh, this is a good way of describing this. And the goal of academics is to say something new, which is going to get you, your tenures and promotions. So the South Asianists, if somebody is a senior professor in South Asian studies and you're writing a thesis criticizing the use of the term sant, and this person has used it throughout their work for 2 decades, they're not going to be happy. I think another audience is that of humanities scholars. So if you are liberally quoting Foucault and Bourdieu and so on, that is going to make you look good. I'll give you the example of Oberoi. Oberoi's work actually has nothing to do with postmodernism. It's pretty much a standard historical study, and he's done some good archival work. The main problem, I think, is the stuff that he didn't read and his final interpretations. But what is amazing is at the end of his work, he sticks in little quotes from Foucault and talks, well, what I'm doing is fitting into the Foucaultian episteme, right? And he talks about the Singh Sabha movement as epistemic change. The problem is that what he says in the beginning and the end has nothing to do with his argument. So he's just putting it there for window dressing, because presumably whoever was going to review his book at University of Chicago Press would be happier to see Foucault being quoted, right? So that's another example. I think a third example is much broader, so I'm going in terms of breadth, which is that for a lot of academics, there's this idea that, religion should be hidden away, that, the university is a place where, we should not have, these kind of faith identities, and it's all about, intellectual quality and so on. So in some sense, this is a little bit of a legacy of the Enlightenment and some aspects of modernity and so on. But again, it sort of tends to equate religion with fundamentalism. And I think Muslim scholars are struggling with this a lot. And I think Sikh scholars, rather than pushing back, have actually caved in. And I think this is what one of the problems is with Peshora Singh. He wants to please everybody. So he wants to please the South Asianists. He wants to please the humanities scholars, even though he doesn't do postmodernism. He wants to please the chancellor of the university and the dean and so on. And by saying, oh yeah, we are just a part of this, one global family, and our differences are irrelevant. He looks like a very kind of nice guy. And I think so. There are these different audiences. I could probably think of a few more audiences that Sikh academics feel like they have to appeal to. It's very complicated, because the role of religion in the modern world is complicated, right? And I think we're still grappling with that. And to Munder's credit, he tries to grapple with that. I think he just gets it completely wrong. He's really does not get it right in terms of how Sikhs fit into that, right? So one argument I use is that what some of these scholars are doing is the same thing that Procrustes did in Greek mythology. Procrustes had an inn, a motel, I guess, a ancient precursor of a motel. And apparently, in the story, what he did with travelers was he gave them a bed. If the bed was too short, he chopped off their legs. And if the bed was too long, he stretched them out on a rack. And I think this is what some scholars are doing to the Sikhs. They want the Sikh community to fit into their conceptual bed, which they've already been given by somebody else or developed from somewhere else. Sorry, very long answer, but gets to the heart of it.
In the back right here.
Yes. Yeah.
Foucault as well isn't talking about, individuals. He's talking about a discourse that, encapsulates us all. So how are you outside of this formation, right? That's the whole problem, right? Where do we locate resistance? This is Said, then privileges the secular intellectual. Foucault looks at, transgression. Assad, I think, is good because he's saying, no, we need to return to the foundational text. For him, the Quran and Hadith, very much on his father than Muhammad Assad. So then how, in the university, can we... I would say we need to be outside the university, but maybe you have a different answer.
So couple of things. One about Assad, and I was just using one particular example from Assad and saying that, it's actually much more pervasive, and I guess what you're saying is that Assad recognizes that. That's So the example I was using from Assad was an academic studying a tribesperson, right? And what I was saying is that we can bring that same anthropological asymmetry within the university so that you have academic tribes. And so when, we're looking at Sikh studies, the scholars of Sikh studies are having to conform to tribes can be defined not just by ethnicity, but also by commonality of worldview. We should take this offline, but let me just respond to your second practical issue, which is that Where do we do this, right? And what I've seen is that often Sikhs say, forget the university, let's just create our own universities, let's create our own institutes. And maybe there's a role for that, but what I see is that Western academia is a very significant power structure. It is the knowledge production machine in the world, and what I'm saying is that we need to recognize the current asymmetries, and you have to change it from within. And why am I able to do that? I said to you, because I have already achieved whatever I was going to achieve in economics. I don't have to please anybody when I talk about Sikh studies. So I'm not beholden to any of that.
Kind of methodology on how we should approach history, for example. So if you say don't do history, do itihas or something, right? There's a fundamental
Okay,
break.
so that's a really deep philosophical question, and I'll have to admit that I'm a prisoner of Western empirical methods, and so I'm sorry. But they're not. Mandir and Bhogal are saying almost like the facts don't matter. We can adjust the facts to fit our story, and that I think is problematic. I think this is a debate that we'll never completely solve. But what I'm saying is at least let's get the facts right, and let's tell the basic stories the best we can, and I'm saying that's not happening right now. Again, maybe we can continue this offline, but you're raising some very fundamental points, and what I'm I guess what I'm doing in my approach is to say, okay, I can't fix these really foundational issues in terms of, how knowledge production is structured in the modern world, and what has happened as a result of modernity. But what I'm saying is we can identify specific problems and fix them, and it has to be done through first a recognition of those problems. And we have to prevent a recycling of problematic interpretations. As I said, Oberoi's work is 20 years old. It's still getting recycled and cited, even though it's got huge problems. And even though it has been refuted in academia by supposedly a prominent academic. So that, to me, highlights some fundamental asymmetries that we have to address. Great.
Thank you so much for such an amazing and intellectually stimulating start to our day. So I hope that talk encouraged you not just to think about why we do what we do, but how we know what we know. What are the sources of our knowledge? Do you question certain truths or quote-unquote facts? And how do we organize around facts and the construction of knowledge? I hope that these are questions that you're all thinking through in a very serious and deep way as the day continues. A few quick announcements before we get to the first panel. First, for those of you that are standing in the back or in chairs in the back, if you could fill in these front rows, we would really appreciate it. You can actually just do that right now while I'm talking. Don't feel rude. Actually, if everyone in the back row could just stand up and sit in the front, that would be fantastic. Come sit with me. I'm by myself, please. No? Back row over there. Thank you. The second announcement is we are streaming live on TV84 right now. So if you have friends or family that were not able to join us, please spread the word and have them watch the stream live from their computers and homes. Nobody else wants to move to the front? All right. So the first panel of the day is entitled Sikhs in the U.S., and we are lucky to have Jasleen Kaur, who's a Cal law student, here as the panelist. She can come down and she'll introduce each of the panels. And it's a reminder throughout the panel to really think critically about not just their talks, but the relationship between the papers, and Justin can provide you a little bit more context on that. And afterwards, we'll have time for questions and answers. So please help me in welcoming Justine.
Good morning, everyone. I have the pleasure of moderating the first panel of the day entitled Six in the U.S. And if I could get all the panelists, Simran Kaur, Mandeep, and Philip to come down and sit in the chairs up front. So what I'm going to do is just introduce each panelist, have them do their presentation, and then we'll go through everything, and then I'll have a few questions, and I'll facilitate questions from the audience. So our first presenter is Simran Kaur from the University of Utah. Simran was born, raised, and educated in Salt Lake City, Utah, with degrees in chemistry and gender studies. She now pursues an MD at the University of Utah School of Medicine. She hopes to work closely with minoritized women in reproductive and sexual health. In her free time, she writes stories, watches movies, and listens to hip-hop. And she will be presenting her paper, Understanding Sex Selection and Sex-Selective Abortion Bans in the U.S. Punjabi Sikh Communities. Okay. Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. So I'm going to apologize. I always have water with me. I'm from Utah. We're a desert, so if I start drinking water, don't be worried. I'm okay. It's out of habit. So in the spirit of missing class yesterday and flying here, I'm going to do a little homage to one of my professors. He always starts class with a picture of a monument or a lake or a mountain, because we're in Utah, there's a lot of outdoor stuff, and he asks the class, what is this? Where is this? I'm going to ask the audience if anyone knows where this is. This is a very blurry picture, I'm sorry. I didn't expect anyone to know. I don't know of anyone who's from Utah here. I'd probably know you. But this is downtown Salt Lake City. So downtown Salt Lake City, it's not the bad picture quality. What you see, the kind of fogginess, is not fog. It's a nice word we say. It's called the winter inversion, and it's actually pollution. So I'm very grateful to be here today, to have the opportunity to present in front of all of you and be away from this pollution. Inversion, I mean. Okay. So the title of my talk is Understanding Sex Selection and Sex-Selective Abortion Bans in U.S. Punjabi Sikh Communities, and we are going to break this down, all of it. So again, my name is Simran. I'm a first-year student at the University of Utah School of Medicine, and yeah, let's get in it. Okay, so here's a quick outline. We're going to talk about sex and gender and what is the difference between these two terms, talk about sex ratios, a history of selection specifically in Punjab, sex selection in the U.S., and then ending with sex-selective abortion bans. Okay, so sex and gender are different. Sex is a biological thing. Gender is not a biological thing. So in this cartoon, you see someone asking, what I presume a parent or a guardian, is it a boy or a girl? And they answer, I don't know, it can't talk yet. And I think this is a good representation that this question is not a valid question. A more accurate question would be, is this a male or a female? Because sex is that binary that we think of, male, female, and, you know, we can talk about chromosomes, we can talk about internal genitalia, and we can talk about external genitalia. And I think it's also important to note that three biological phenomena, they don't all have to be concordant. In fact, in medicine, we see all of these three things don't line up all the time. So even this idea of sex is not one or the other. For gender, we want to recognize that this is a social construct, much like how we talk about race as a social construct. Gender is also having to do with expectations, characteristics, abilities, the meaning that we ascribe to different sexes. So sex is what you're born with, gender is what you're given. So the meaning that we ascribe to a male gender is that of action, and the meaning that we ascribe to the female sex is that of passivity. Okay, so sex ratios compares the number of females and males in a specific population group, and this can be any population, however you define population. And it's important to note that populations are not always equally balanced. So what that means is for every one male, you're not always going to get exactly one female. You might get 1.02 females. So even this makes sense statistically. If you have a coin, you flip a coin however billions of times, you're not guaranteed 50% heads, 50% tails. We're only guaranteed that if you do it an infinite number of times, but we don't have infinite numbers of people. And this also makes sense biologically. More male babies are born, more female babies survive, and then that changes throughout life. So females actually have a longer life expectancy, so we see female, the sex ratios tip one way or another based on where, what ages we're looking at. Okay, so India is one of the few countries where female infant mortality is higher than male infant mortality, and this is, like I said, more females survive infancy, so in India we see it the opposite, where more males are surviving infancy. Okay, so here is a table of sex ratios. Oh, so blurry. So I'm just going to point out, so these are the ratios. So this is per 1,000 males. This is how many females there are. And then I'm going to point out Punjab, and you notice that the numbers are much less. And we also see a very interesting, right here between 41 and 51, we see the numbers kind of change and go up from there. And what happened between 41 and 51? Partition happened. Okay. And then there's Delhi as also just a comparison, something to point out, that we're doing better than Delhi. This is good. Okay. So here is a comparison for other states in India, and we can see that the South states generally do a lot better. Their ratios are a lot less skewed than states in the North, and we're going to talk about why that is. So why is sex selection happening in Punjab? Why is sex selection happening in India in general? So our culture is patrilineal. The bloodline is passed on through the males. Our culture is patriarchal. The men hold the power in our communities, and we are patrilocal, and that means that when couples get married, in the husband's household or family. Economics, we know these things. Dowry, parents of females are expected to give money to the future husband's family, and earning potential. I find this so fascinating that if you spend any time in Punjab, you see women doing a lot of work, right? They do the cooking, they do the cleaning, they do things, in the field, they take care of the kids, all of these things. But this is not bringing in money. This is work, but it is not work that is paid. Therefore, it's called, sitting at home. People, women sit at home all day. So they don't have earning potential because the work that they're doing, this feminine labor, is not compensated. Okay. Hypergamy, casteism. Hypergamy is marrying up, so you want to marry your daughters to a higher caste than your own. And here's a good quote that I'll just read quickly. Hypergamy, or the rule that a girl must be given in marriage to a man of a higher rank, makes it very difficult and very expensive to obtain a suitable husband, while the admission of inferiority, which is implied in giving a girl in marriage, is a blow to a man's pride. Apart from this, a Rajput husband often tyrannizes his father-in-law. Female infanticide was resorted to in order to avoid these troubles which the marriage of a daughter involved. So we see both gender bias and caste bias. And what's even more fascinating is sex ratios are skewed in higher caste families, and higher caste often correlates to higher wealth. So we see that it's not all about economics, that even in high caste families, the sex ratios are even more skewed. And they attribute that to not being able to marry your daughter up, right? Okay, geography. So Punjab is obviously in the north, and we see those ratios are more skewed in the north. And lots of scholars think that it's because the north has suffered a lot of violence and trauma in terms of invasion and war, and we've seen a lot of bloodshed up there. So the males and men are valued more as fighters, as people who can protect. Okay, and population control. So India instituted all of these population control, family planning things, and it became sort of out of style to have bigger families. It was a cultural shift that we're seeing actually all across the world, where families are becoming smaller and smaller. So if you think about it, how essential it is to have a son. Now you only have 2 coin tosses, right, to get a son. So you see sex selection happening in greater numbers because our families are getting smaller. Okay, so I am going to shift to, I'm missing a slide. Okay, that's okay. Okay, so I'm going to shift to sex selection in a U.S. context. So is this happening? I want to sort of get an idea of what the audience thinks. So go ahead and raise your hand if you think that sex selection is happening in U.S. Punjabi Sikh communities. Okay. Yeah, so a lot of us think it's, and I too believe that it's happening. So let's look at some of the numbers. So, these are so blurry. Okay, so if you look on your very right, you see Indians in India. So you see how biased those sex ratios are. And then Chinese in China, U.S.-born white, foreign-born Chinese, and foreign-born Indian Americans. So it's very striking to me that we actually are having more daughters than our white counterparts in this country. So it's very interesting because we hear stories. We know of our families, of our friends, of, all of these people who go through these methods to have sons. But the numbers, it's so interesting that the numbers don't support that. Okay, so there are 105 males for every 100 females. And this is within biological parameters. This is not something that we look at and say this is skewed. This is within biological parameters. Okay, so sex-selective abortion bans. All the red states are states that have passed laws banning sex-selective abortions, and all the gray states are states in which these laws have been introduced. And we can see this is very popular. So this idea that we need to ban sex-selective abortions is very popular. It caught on really fast, and these are all states that have thought about it or have passed laws. And I'm very happy to see Utah's not on there, though we have a lot of other problems around abortion. This is not one of them. Okay. So I'm going to just talk about some of the myths that are very that are directly, if not directly in the legislation, are talked about around the legislation by policymakers. One of the myths is that because the U.S. has Indian immigrants, they must be practicing sex selection in the U.S. So I'm going to read this quote. This was a quote in a hearing for one of the subcommittees on one of these bills. So while it is difficult to say with any exactitude how many sex-selective abortions are taking place in the U.S. each year, the number is not trivial. We are talking about communities consisting of 3.9 million Chinese Americans, 2.8 million Asian Indians, and 6 million Korean Americans. The highly skewed sex ratios found in census surveys suggest among these groups alone that tens of thousands of unborn girls have been eliminated for no other reason that they are considered by some to be the wrong sex. So we see this jump where selection is happening in India, China, Korea. So that means that when you take those people in those countries and put them in the U.S., that means it's also happening here. This is a myth. And then again, evidence strongly suggests that some Americans are exercising sex selection abortion practices within the United States consistent with the discriminatory practices common to their country of origin or the country to which they place their ancestry. So we see, again, what's happening in their homeland or whatever translates directly to what they do in the U.S. Okay. Another myth is that these abortion bans are actually correcting the sex ratios. But we saw that the sex ratios weren't a problem in the first place, so we're not really correcting anything. But we do have data to support that they are not changing the sex ratios in the U.S. So Illinois and Pennsylvania are two states that have banned sex-selective abortions. Oh, so blurry. I'm so sorry. So Illinois, we look at the state itself of Illinois and the border states around Illinois. And if you look at these, you see that there's really no change. Nothing has changed. The ratios stayed the same. This was, for two different states. And we have these numbers for like all of the states that have put these bans in place. So it didn't correct anything because there was nothing to correct. But here's the data to support that nothing happened. Okay. So what have these bans actually done? They've done a lot of things, and they've really put a rift in feminist communities, in groups that advocate for women's rights and women's choice and all of that thing, and all those things. So they've increased distrust between providers and their patients, and this is especially true when there is a language barrier. There might be a miscommunication or some sort of barrier to understanding, and providers are not trusting their patients. They are questioning them. They are interrogating them for, why are you here? And you better not be here for sex selection. And these bans have fueled racist stereotypes, particularly against Punjabi Americans. So we are assumed when we go in to terminate a pregnancy that it is because we think we have a female child and we want a male child. And like I said, this has created tension between pro-choice activists and gender equity activists, saying that that choice is good, but it's not good if you're using it to do sex selection. And this ban has really limited access to abortion because this ban has focused on abortion. Abortion is not the only way to choose your sex. If you're doing in vitro fertilization, there's something called sperm sorting, where you can sort out, the sperm, because the sperm carries the X or Y chromosome. That's the one that determines the sex of the baby. So you can sort the sperm, sort the ones that have the Y chromosome, and sort the ones that have the X chromosome, and you can get the baby sex of your choice. So because this ban and this legislation is so focused on abortion, we do not believe that they're doing us a favor, right, by telling us that we shouldn't have sex-selective abortions. Okay, so moving forward, so SUFFER is a Sikh Feminist Research Institute, and I just want to read this quote. As children of Khalsa, the Sikhs of the Guru have always condemned sex selection, including feticide and infanticide, as reflected in the prohibition of the practice in our Sikh Rahat Maryada code of conduct. Also, as exemplified by our gurus, we know we must combat discrimination with as much love as strength. Instead of solely shaming those who commit acts of discrimination within pockets of our own communities, we assert we must simultaneously hold ourselves accountable to creating social systems committed to equity, anti-oppression, and pluralism. So my point, I guess, is that we are seeing all of these little abortion bans kind of spike up, and we've seen folks in our community who have supported them. And this, I think, speaks to how, sort of in general, how we view women and how we view pregnancy and motherhood and all of that. Because if we are concerned, if sex selection makes us concerned about gender equity, then why are we starting with the pregnancy? Why are we not starting instead with the person who is pregnant? How did that person grow up? What were the social situations around that person's pregnancy? How did they come to that place? And what can we do so that we don't start the conversation at the pregnancy? How can we start this conversation earlier on? How girls are treated, how they are, how we treat them growing up, how we treat them in adolescence, and all of that. So I think I'm done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simran. You took us through an empirical analysis of data within India and Punjab and sex ratios in Punjab, and then kind of used that as the context and debunked myths about sex selection happening in the U.S. and also debunked myths about sex bans actually proactively doing anything to fix and correct sex ratios within non-Indian communities. And then you kind of talked about how these stereotypes about sex selection on immigrant communities, on the Punjabi community, actually creates a kind of an environment of mistrust with the physician and the patient, and a lot of other issues that come out of that. And the racist stereotypes about terminating pregnancy within the Punjabi community. And then you kind of took it back and talked about how the conversations about sex selection need to start happening a lot sooner than at the pregnancy stage. So thank you. The next person that we have, the next panelist, is Mandeep Singh. And Mandeep is a recent Columbia grad currently doing a business development program at Dropbox. At Columbia, he majored in urban studies with a specialization in political science and business management. Apart from his academic pursuits, he is involved with a variety of social advocacy, diversity, and community engagement initiatives. He is the co-founder of both Columbia First Generation Low Income Partnership and Columbia University Seva. Today, he will be presenting his senior thesis, The Village of Richmond Hill, an analysis of Punjabi youth in New York City.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thanks for that awesome introduction, Jasleen. She made me sound a lot cooler than I actually am. Awesome. As Jasleen mentioned, today I'm going to be talking about my thesis that I wrote my senior year of college. I graduated from Columbia this past May, and as a part of my urban studies major, I had to write a thesis. And so for my thesis, I titled it The Village of Richmond Hill, an analysis of Punjabi youth in New York City. So a little bit of context before we start. For those folks who've never gotten a chance to go to New York's made of 5 different boroughs, so 5 different parts of New York. There's Manhattan, the tall buildings and the taxis that you see in the picture. There's Bronx in the north. There's Queens and Brooklyn on the east. And there's Staten Island, which is an island off the coast of Manhattan that you don't really never need to go to when you're there. So. But I'll be focusing on Richmond Hill today, and when I refer to Richmond Hill, it's actually a neighborhood in Queens in the eastern part of the city. Before I kind of dive into what I actually uncovered in my research and the kind of arguments that I make in my thesis, I kind of want to talk to you a little bit about where my question comes from and talk to you why I wanted to study what I studied for the entirety of the year. Other than being one of my favorite pictures from graduation, the reason why I show you this picture is because of the guy carrying me, Gurinder Singh. And some of you might know him, have met him. He's from New York. And where the question really started was, in spaces like these, like Sikholars, in Surat, in Saldef, and all these other initiatives that both of us started to be a part of, we always looked at each other and realized, hey man, why are we the only ones from Richmond Hill in these spaces? That sophomore year, when I was getting involved with the Sikh American community, is when I realized that we were very, very few people in the space having these conversations. Over time, I also met one of my other very, very good friends, Harjeet Singh from California. He graduated from UC Berkeley. And we started talking to him as well and realizing a lot of the issues that Gurwinder and I had growing up in Richmond Hill, he felt in Yuba City as well. So taking that into account, this question kind of consolidated into figuring out what the challenges are that first-gen, low-income Punjabi Sikh youth face in Richmond Hill, New York. Gurinder and I, and Harjeet as well, we knew that these diasporic communities that come from working-class backgrounds face a lot of challenges, but we can never really put our finger on it. And my goal with this presentation and this thesis is to kind of uncover that and enlighten a little bit about the intersectional challenges that exist for youth in these communities. So just to guide you through what we're going to talk about today, I want to give a little bit more background on Richmond Hill so we're all on the same page. Then I want to talk about my argument, which is essentially that there are so many intersectional challenges that are all working together to help to hinder the mobility that Punjabi Sikh youth face in Richmond Hill through the cultural conflicts and gender norms, through educational paradoxes, and the cycle of poverty, which is really important to talk about. And then I'll kind of conclude on what this means in the larger picture and how we should move forward. Everybody cool with that? Yeah, awesome. Cool. So for folks, I know that most people come from the West Coast, so I want to give a little bit more background on my neighborhood and the East, in the East Coast. So a lot of people say, there's not a lot of numbers, but people say that Richmond Hill has the highest concentration of East Coast, highest concentration of Sikhs in the East Coast, and you can definitely see that when you're there in terms of how many Gurdwara Sahibs there are, how many Punjabi-owned restaurants and community-owned businesses there are as well. It's really important to understand like who lives in Richmond Hill. I know we have a lot of talks about immigration, and we're very well versed for the most part on Punjabi Sikh immigration to the United States. But what's important to realize is that there's the first wave of migration that happened in the 1960s and 1970s. Some of you might be familiar with the concept of the brain drain. And that's where intellectuals, academics, people who come from economic privilege and also educational privilege move from India to here to work in the United States in tech companies or other organizations as lawyers or doctors or whatever it may be. Well, what's important to study, to understand about my presentation is that, and about Richmond Hill, is that that's not the wave of immigration that I'll be talking about. I'll be talking about the second wave of immigration. So as we're all too familiar with many times over and over again, we know that 1980s was a very, very, very hard time for people in Punjab, regardless of your background, your caste, wherever you come. If you were a Sikh in Punjab or you were Sikh in India, it was a tough time for you in the 80s. Not only was there a lot of political turmoil, there was actually a lot of economic turmoil as well. There were no jobs, especially for with the Green Revolution and other issues. Farmers and working class people even had immense challenges staying employed and making money for their families. What happened that's in the 80s and the early 90s is the second wave of immigration. And now, not looking at the brain drain and the intellectuals that were coming over, now a lot of working class people who come from farming backgrounds were able to come to the United States and had the opportunity to do so. And so that's actually a picture of my father looking swagged out next to our taxi cab. He's quite a dapper fellow. And so he's an example of this wave of immigration that came to Richmond Hill and New York. He was actually one of the few people from his brothers and sisters and our extended family to go to college, but he actually eventually had to drop out and join the military and then eventually move here in order to support his very large family. And that's kind of the testament of a lot of the people who moved here to places like Yuba City or Toronto, but definitely so in Richmond Hill in New York. This is a map of Richmond Hill, and this is the technical boundaries and the social and cultural boundaries within it. I wish I knew GIS back in the day to make a more interactive map, but Google Maps does the job too. These dots are different major key institutes. I highlight Baba Makhan Shah Labana's and Sikh Cultural Society are two of the biggest gurdwaras in South Richmond Hill, but actually since my thesis, there's two more gurdwaras in the community and a couple of more deras or smaller places of worship also coming up. I highlight Paul Risotto Park, which everybody calls Smoky Park. If you ever watch TV like TV84 or you watch Alpha ATC Punjabi, there's a lot of mele and a lot of carnivals that happen out of there. That's one of the few places, that green box over there, where youth actually have the chance to congregate. And I'll be talking a little bit about those opportunities as well. And what's important to also realize is that their concentration is here, but now everywhere around this kind of like center, there's Punjabi Sikhs who moved here in the 80s and 90s, living all over Queens and New York City. Why did they exactly move into this one specific neighborhood in Richmond Hill? So Richmond Hill actually used to be known as Little Germantown in the 1800s and the early 1900s. There was a lot of German and Italian immigrants. But what happened is that with white flight, a lot of those white immigrants and those white immigrant communities were moving out now to the suburbs. So what happened was that and at the same time in the 80s and the 90s, a lot of immigrant communities, a lot of Punjabis, but also Indo-Caribbeans, and a lot of Latinos and African Americans were moving into the neighborhood and kind of revamping that up. So before this Gurdwara was started, there was no real Gurdwara in a 300-mile radius of New York City. So when this started, this kind of became a landmark in the community. And the reason why it happened in Richmond Hill is very interesting. It actually happened because it used to be a church. And when you have specific regulations and laws for a church, it's very easy to bring another place of worship because you don't have to get new licenses and regulations and all that. So it was and as the white community and as the Christian community was moving out, it just became a prime real estate for the organizers to come in and set this up. And ever since then, people always want to gravitate towards where there's a Gurdwara Sahib, especially people coming from villages, because that's an important part of their village life. Taking that into account, talking a little bit more about the structure of my thesis is very much an ethnography. And for those who don't know what an ethnography is the study of cultures. And it's a study of a specific group of people, predominantly through observation and interviews. So what I'll be talking about today and my thesis is very much based on is an ethnography supplemented by other academic and stats and histories that have existed. But that's what's fundamentally going to be the core of my research. That was the core of my research. Throughout senior year, I conducted 12 extensive interviews. They were all from an hour to 2 hours long. It was conducted between kids who were ages of 14 to 22. There were 6 males and 6 females, and they all had a diverse experience in terms of where they went to school and their family structure as well. Additionally, as I mentioned, I was born and raised in Richmond Hill. So I was part of Seva New York, which is the only immigrant advocacy nonprofit that exists in the community. They've done a lot of great things, and I've been involved with them since high school. So a lot of my connections and a lot of my observations also come from my organizing there. But at the same time, the picture that you saw at the intro slide of the group of kids was through this organization that I helped to start my senior year as well, called ROOP, which stands for Richmond Hill Organizing Opportunity for Punjabi Youth. And Gurwinder and I actually are the co-founders of that. And the mission was to start a youth empowerment program for kids in Richmond Hill to talk about identity and also talk about education and how they can get out of Richmond Hill and seize the opportunities that exist in New York City. So a lot of my observations and thesis is based on that as well. And lastly, this is my family. It's a little blurry because I couldn't actually find a picture of all of us because we're always so busy. It's hard to be in the same room. But I really base a lot of my also connections and observations on my time with my family and use them as a supplemental source, but also what I've seen in the neighborhood overall. So looking at the overall thesis, what did I exactly argue? I argue that a lot of Punjabi immigrants moved here for upward mobility for their kids, for their families, to get jobs. Well, what's essentially happening is that even though they come in with this hope, Punjabi American teenagers growing up in Richmond Hill and other urban enclaves like Richmond Hill are inheriting their own set of cultural issues, education issues, and class challenges. And that's definitely a typo. But there's a lot of challenges, so that's why I put there. And that's what I'll be talking about today, is the cultural issues that include gender issues, education, and class. So if there's anything that I want you to get away with today, is that these are 3 intersectional issues that are really facilitating the life of the kids that I talk about. Going into the first part is a cultural conflicts. As some of you, or a majority of you, might be first generation moving here, this is something that you might be very, very familiar with, so I won't spend too much time on it. But essentially, a lot of these kids are living in 2 different worlds. Because Richmond Hill is such a concentrated spot, assimilation happens very, very slowly. And people are kind of hesitant to kind of become Western, right? And so a lot of people like my dad and all the immigrants that came in, they want to preserve their culture. They have these very specific values that they want to instill in their kids. And as you may know, Punjabi culture is very much about interdependence. It's about how we share, how we live. It's about honor and respect and all these different values that it's all about social skills and how we as a community interact with each other. On the other hand, people like myself and the youth in Richmond Hill are growing up in New York City, one of the fastest moving places in the world, where it's all about independence, it's all about hustle and grit and doing you and going out and all these other things that are fundamentally very different from the value set of Punjabi culture. And what essentially happens is because it's possible to keep that Pind mentality, preserve that village life and that interdependence on each other, there's a valuation in the community to keep Punjabi values over Western traditions. So you might be like, oh, like, dekhiya falane di kudi, like, idhe na ghumdi pi hai, or like, did you see what he did there, or like, all these like very like gossipy things. That actually really emerged because the community wants to keep Punjabi values over the Western values of the nation that they live in now. There's also a lot of cultural preservation of these standards. And so for me, like a personal example, is that everybody's like, hey Mandeep, like, did you grow up in New York City? Or did you grow up in Punjab? I'm like, no, I didn't. They're like, wow, you're from New York? Yeah. They're like, why is your Punjabi so good? And I was like, you know, everybody's commenting on why my Punjabi is so good. But for me, I never thought about that because in Richmond Hill, that's a standard. You don't go to Sabji Mandi and talk to Auntie Ji in English. Like, you just don't. Like, you know, you don't talk to Mama or Masi Ji in English. Like, that's Punjabi is the standard, and that's the way we grew up, and that's very, very much so valued. And the last thing, the point to know about this communal eye of this stress of this keeping this culture together in Richmond Hill is that now kids live a double life. So now, not only are you a Punjabi growing up in Richmond Hill and you have your family and those values, but you're also just a kid in New York trying to grow up, trying to go to school, play basketball, listen to hip hop, all the things that you do normally. And you have to kind of balance these, and that produces a lot of stress for a lot of the youth growing up in Richmond Hill. Simran did a great job at tackling a lot of like gender norms that exist in the community. So I won't spend too much time on what those are. But what's important to think about those gender norms and those pressures of being domesticated and knowing how to learn, knowing how to cook, like making sure you're home on time, and all these other really, really big cultural norms that exist for women specifically, those also impede the ability for women to be mobile, to take on the opportunities that exist in the city. And a lot of the female youth, even that I interviewed, were like, oh my God, we can't be seen together, even though like you're just doing it for school, like you're a guy, I'm a girl. And these stresses are really, really also affecting women in a way that are not affecting men. A really sad story that I'll share quickly. I talked to my dad on the way to work every day, and sitting in the back of my like tech shuttle, trying to be quiet in Punjabi. I was like, hey, Dad, what's going on? What's something new happening? And he's like, oh, do you remember so-and-so? I was like, of course I remember so-and-so. And he said, yeah, their daughter just got engaged. Like, they just did an arranged marriage for them. And I was like, oh, cool. Then I was like, wait, isn't she really young? And this girl is 17. And my dad was just infuriated. You get the point. So he was really, really mad. My dad is generally very progressive, has some sort of... But also, a lot of the community is moving towards realizing that that's a very old world value of getting girls married really early. But the reality and why I share that is that things like this still exist. And not only do they exist in Punjab, they exist here in these communities. So that's really important to keep in mind. Working right next to gender is education. So parents are always like, hey, pordo, like study. That's like even working class communities, they're like, you have to study and you have to do well. What's happening is kids like myself and the people that I interviewed are internalizing that. They're like, they know it's important to study. Their parents brought them here for this. They left India because of that, because of education. And so they feel that need to want to work hard and do well in school. The reason why I call it a paradox is because the schools that they come to in Richmond Hill are failing them. So even though parents want them to do well, kids want to do well, the schools don't let them do well. That's a picture of Richmond Hill High School, and those red boxes are actually rooms that were created because there wasn't enough space in this high school for kids to go there. And what essentially also happened is that Richmond Hill High School was shut down because it was a failing school. So what's happening is that when they come to this community, they don't have the proper means to actually get that mobility through education. Another fact that I wanted to share is that according to the Sikh Coalition, over 60% of Sikh youth in Richmond Hill and in New York City overall are bullied in their schools. And so not only are these schools terrible, these environments are really, really awful and keeping them very, very marginalized in the spaces that they're in, and posing another challenge for them. And the last quick point I want to make about education is that CUNY, which stands for City University of New York, is a local public, it's 6 or 7 schools that are all local city schools for higher education. Not only are the institutions failing them, but what's happening is a lot of parents don't want their kids to go far for opportunities and different opportunities because they want to keep them safe. So Karam, who was one of my mentees, was a senior in high school. Her parents didn't even let her apply anywhere, and neither did she, even though she wanted to study abroad, go to Boston, do this, because there was no way her family was letting her leave New York City. And the last thing I really want to talk about and really stress is the cycle of poverty and disempowerment. These issues in terms of talking about culture and gender can't be ignored when you can't ignore class when we talk about these things, because it's underlying within all these different issues. There's not a lot of stats specifically on the Punjabi Sikh community, but according to this nonprofit called South Asian Youth Action, 23.1% of South Asian youth live in poverty compared to 18.9% of other ethnicities. So South Asian youth, which Punjabi, a lot of these numbers come from Punjabi youth as well, that are living in rates of poverty that are much higher than anywhere else in the city, but also the country. Also, a lot of the people in the community, their parents are working as taxi drivers, construction workers, working in the restaurant industry, very labor-intensive work. Not only does that have a lot of implications on their parents, but it also has implications on their parents' bodies, but also their family structures and what they can do and be available. And looking at the taxi industry specifically, there's a lease system. So at least in terms of that system, they pay a certain amount of money to work for seven days a week. So there's an incentive not to take a day off. So I can probably count on one hand the number of days my dad has taken off in the last 5 years, because there's no incentive to take day off and spend time on yourself, because the work demands being there and being present always. And there's a lot of things I talk about in this chapter of my thesis, but the kind of last major point I want to make about the cycle of poverty is that with this coming into Richmond Hill and working in the service sector industry, a lot of specific capital, economic and social capital, is created around those industries. So this is actually a graph of the medallion market, which is what you have to buy to operate a taxi over time. And so a taxi medallion was a very, very lucrative thing to invest in over time. And so a lot of Punjabi community actually bought these medallions. And now there's a whole crash because of Uber and these other things, which is another issue. But what's realizing is that the community has built capital. It's economic capital and also social capital on how to get involved with this industry. However, as going to Columbia, if I wanted to get a job on the Hill, there's no way in heck my dad could help me do that. There's no way he could look at my cover letter or a resume, because that's not the world that he comes from and doesn't have those privileges. But at the same time, if I want to get my taxi license, boom, in a week I have my taxi license, because that's the capital that he can provide. I got a speeding ticket before I left New York, and he's already taking care of it for me. Yeah? So just bringing it all together, I know I kind of touched on a lot of different issues, of culture issues, gender issues, education, and class. What's really important to realize is that, as I mentioned, these youth growing up, because of all these issues working with them, they're forging a really unique identity. Where they're keeping the traditional aspects of their family and the community that they live in, but they're also picking up the intricacies of urban America. They like hip hop and going out. And now they're balancing these and are creating a very unique identity. But what's kind of the sad thing, but also the thing that we need to work on as a community, is that even though these parents came here because they wanted their kids to do well, these different cultural, structural, and communal challenges are actually leading to a cycle of disempowerment for them and are keeping them from moving forward and breaking out of this and going on and taking advantage of all the opportunities that exist. And this isn't the case just for Richmond Hill. This is the case for other communities as well that also have predominantly working class communities. So my action step, or my thought that I want to leave you with is, as a Sikh community, as a Punjabi community, how can we work together to empower these youth and tackle these challenges? Because there's thousands and thousands of kids who are facing these issues, and how are we going to move forward and actually empower them to get out of there? And if I didn't have people helping me do that, I wouldn't be in this room giving this presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mandeep. Mandeep was able to actually offer what I see as a kind of a counterpoint to Simran's presentation, where in Simran's presentation, kind of the mentalities of Punjab didn't really translate into empirical data here in the U.S. And Mandeep took us through a presentation where qualitatively he can see Punjab mentality really manifesting in the village of Richmond Hill, as he calls it, and how those mentalities are challenging, are creating challenges in the context of culture, education, and class, and kind of leading to the cycle of disempowerment. So thank you. And our last presentation for this panel is from Philip Deslip. Cool. Okay. Philip is a doctoral student in the Department of Religious Studies at UC Santa Barbara with a focus on Asian and metaphysical religious traditions in modern America. He has published articles in the journals Sikh Formations, Contemporary Buddhism, and Amur Asia, and is a contributor to the South Asian American Digital Archive and the Indian news website Scroll. Today he will be presenting his paper, Reconciling the Multiple Histories of Sikh Dharma of the Western Hemisphere. So welcome, Philip.
Thank you all for having me. Just so I know where I'm at, could I just have a quick show of hands? When I say things like Yogi Bhajan, 3HO, American Sikh, Sikh Dharma, show of hands, how many of those terms are familiar to you? Okay, so we don't have to start from scratch, as it were. So what I'd like to talk about in the time that we have today is trying to kind of tease apart and come to a new, perhaps more nuanced understanding of what who 3HO Sikhs are and what to do with them. It seems like they are an essential stopping point for people who write about Sikhs today, the Sikh diaspora. There kind of needs to be a nod to them as somehow a continuation of Sikhism or presenting Sikhism as a global religion. And this is in no small part due to the efforts of 3HO Sikhs themselves, who not only in the United States and in the West are culturally literate, but they're also tech-savvy, starting some of the first Sikh-centered websites. They also have been very aggressive in terms of publicity and promoting themselves. And some of the hallmarks, very briefly, of 3HO Sikhs, I think it's a good shorthand for them, is the difference between orthodoxy and orthopraxy. So in short, orthopraxy is doing the right things, and orthodoxy is the right understanding and the right beliefs. And it seems to be very lopsided for some very interesting specific reasons with 3HO Sikhs. They're very big on orthopraxy, right things, clothing, diet, keeping cash. As far as orthodoxy goes, they're very unusual. They exist very much in isolation from a wider Punjabi Sikh community. They often don't understand the bunnies that they're reciting, and that there's this whole kind of internal tradition of why that doesn't matter. In fact, if you wanted to qualify to be a Sikh minister in 3HO Sikh Dharma, it is not a requirement that you actually can understand and discuss the Sri Guru Granth Sahib. Just the movement of the mouth is seen as enough. So in brief, 3HO is kind of this unusual, very complex structure that was started by this man, Harbhajan Singh Puri. Refer to him from this point forward as Yogi Bhajan, who was a customs officer at the New Delhi airport, came to Canada in 1968, and then not long after arrived in Los Angeles, and he started teaching a thing that he called Kundalini Yoga, which in the yoga world is an unusual animal. It's very different from Hatha Yoga that we see kind of ubiquitously all around us. His group, Healthy, Happy, Holy Organization, kind of quickly morphed into different things. They were officially incorporated in 1969 in Los Angeles, and they quickly spread out, almost like a franchise model, in 1969 and 1970 by Yogi Bhajan, quickly instructing his students and then authorized to move throughout the country, especially in college towns, and begin teaching and starting 3HO centers and ashrams. So it very quickly had a national presence, And then there was this abrupt shift towards Sikhism in the early 70s. And in the early mid-70s, you kind of see the high point as far as numbers are concerned with 3HO. And they had this very unusual melding yoga and yogic practice and Sikh identity, and still rooted kind of ashram structure of different communities spread throughout the country. And then towards the end of the 70s, you have this kind of movement clustering towards very specific sites for the group in New Mexico, in Los Angeles, and on the East Coast, in Virginia. And then in the 80s are kind of marked by businesses created by members of 3HO suddenly becoming very big and very profitable. And then in the 90s, Yogi Bhajan's health declines, and then he passes away I believe about 10, 12 years ago. So that's kind of a very brief overview of 3HO and Yogi Bhajan. My academic work with 3HO originally began by being very curious about the form of yoga they practice, Kundalini Yoga. As I said, it's very unique within the yoga world, very different and distinct from other types of yoga, and the claims that it makes for itself are very unusual. It claims to be connected to the Sikh tradition. Better. It also claims to have been a secret tradition, not taught openly because it was too, quote, too powerful, until Yogi Bhajan taught it openly for the first time and to the public. So in short, what I did was a several-year project where I tracked down people who were involved in its early years, tracked down magazines and publications that went print. And what I found was that as opposed to the official story of 3HO, their description of what Kundalini and how it connected to the Sikh tradition, and their story that this man, the alleged Sant Hazara Singh, who is the keeper of the flame for this yogic technology, who trained Yogi Bhajan from childhood and declared him a master of Kundalini Yoga at the age of 16, what I found was that there was a mountain of evidence to suggest that this type of yoga was in fact constructed and made up. And here you have a bunch of examples from newspapers in 1968 to 1970 of Yogi Bhajan saying that he started learning yoga at the age of 18, and then soon after the story switches and he becomes a master 2 years before he said that he began to study yoga. So what I uncovered is that his Kundalini Yoga was essentially a compilation of two of his teachers, Swami Dhirendra Brahmachari and Maharaja Virsa Singh in New Delhi. Students of modern Indian politics know Dhirendra Brahmachari as the man who is called Indira Gandhi's Rasputin, because he was Indira Gandhi's personal yoga teacher. So it seems that instead of being ancient and secret and connected to Sikhi, Yogi Bhajan's Kundalini Yoga was essentially a quick compilation of teachings and techniques from these two figures, and often these techniques were just copied over wholesale. So on the left you have ancient Kundalini Yoga teachings, and on the right you have Dhirendra, who Yogi Bhajan studied with for several years, photographs from his book, just kind of Control-C, Control-V, copy and paste. And it turns out that the figure of Sant Singh is a phantom. He doesn't exist at all. From the people that it like in the Punjab, and we're talking about this master, and some enterprising merchant said, "Oh yeah, I can get a photo for you. I'll be back tomorrow," and probably sold them a photograph of his grandpa. If there is a real Sant Hazara Singh, the only one I have found is the dapper and debonair. Forgive me, he outdoes you. This Sant Hazara Singh, master of the Hawaiian steel guitar. So who cares about the suspicions that everyone has about Kundalini Yoga being proven true? I think it provides a very interesting framework to look at 3HO itself and these American Sikhs. In short, I think the main elements that came out of this study were these three things. Instead of there being a single history of a group, there are multiple histories. Histories that often overlap, sometimes are separate, and often depend on people's position within a group, the time that they were involved, how they related to the group. And the second thing is historiography, which in simple terms is how do we do history? What sources do we look at? Whose voices do we privilege? What events do we find and see as important and significant in crafting a historical narrative? And the third is the idea of dissimulation. Dissimulation simply means that which you present to the outside world, to the public, is different than what your understanding of yourself is in private or personally. You show the world one thing, you believe yourself to be something else. And I think these are kind of the three key lenses that help to view 3HO through. So talking about multiple histories in historiography, what I found in doing research on Kundalini Yoga was that there were essentially these four things. There's 3HO's official history, and 3HO kind of produces a mountain of material, magazines and books, and Yogi Bhajan's lectures, which are all saved for posterity and put online. And you have public history, popular magazines, the works of scholars and academics. And public history often relies, in no small part, on 3HO's official. But what this kind of neglects to appreciate is that 3HO itself has what I would like to call a sacred understanding of itself, that it doesn't just have a mundane history. Things are not just happening for no reason. Things aren't happening in a mundane context, but they're happening as part of a sacred unfolding, a grand divine plan. And kind of the opposite of that is what I call the hidden history, the things that are lost, the ex-members who leave and have stories that they don't want to share anymore, the people who get written out of history. And this is because there isn't simply an organization, but you have an organization that is constantly maintaining and revising its records and its own history of itself. And you'll often see significant figures within the group in the 70s who have a falling out and leave. They are subsequently removed from history and removed from books and magazines produced by the group. One famous example in my mind is the former guitar player for the 60s British rock band The Animals, a man named Anthian Vikram Singh. He was the first Western Sikh convert to play kirtan at the Golden Temple, kind of a very big moment. And once he left the group, you kind of saw that erased from the group's history. And going back to historiography, this is often very connected to the kind of sources you have to understand a group. 3HO kind of policing its own history, 3HO having its own sacred understanding of itself that's not completely revealed within documentation that a scholar can find, but is often in the understandings and the stories that members tell each other or implicitly anticipate with one another. And also with that hidden history with ex-members, lost documents, and people who simply don't want to bring up the past and talk about it, or only want to talk about it anonymously. So very briefly in the time that we have left, I just want to give you a few examples of what I think is important about these different levels of history. In short, very interesting things happen when we align them together. So 3HO likes to believe that these things all unfolded as part of a grand plan. Kind of God, Guru, and Yogi Bhajan. Maybe not in that order. But why did Sikhism suddenly introduced to 3HO in the 70s? Why did the children of initial 3HO members go to boarding schools in India? This is all part of some grand plan for what they believe to have been a Sikh renaissance in the West. True Sikhism taking hold in the West. But when you align these histories, what you see is that often hidden history, things that are not spoken of, things that are in the dark, these are actually the drivers of 3HO's history, whether or not members of the group realize them or not. So to take two examples, there's kind of a famous Zen koan, why did Bodhidharma come from the West? Why did Yogi Bhajan come from Canada to Los Angeles? And if you ask people in 3HO, they would say he came to Los Angeles and he saw the hippies and he saw their drug abuse and he realized that this is something he had to do. This was part of God's plan to come and teach the sacred science of Kundalini Yoga, get young people off of drugs. When you go through the hidden history, and I interviewed Dr. Amarjit Singh Marwa, a dentist who came from Punjab in the 1950s. He was also the person who organized and funded Dalip Singh Saun's campaign for Congress, the first Asian American, the first Sikh to hold office in the U.S. Congress. His story, because he was Yogi Bhajan's first host, is that Yogi Bhajan got a girl pregnant in Canada and was essentially fleeing her and fleeing the law. And that is the driving force behind Yogi Bhajan coming to Los Angeles and 3HO taking root where it did. So to take another example, what's happening within this hidden history in the 1980s? Quite a lot. At the same time that you have, right after to 3HO's boarding schools in India, you have a wave of defections and scandals. You have a large number of 3HO Sikhs who are involved in telemarketing fraud, lottery scams. Largest marijuana smuggling bust in the United States history was with Yogi Bhajan's right hand, a man named Gurjot Singh. You have several secretaries of Yogi Bhajan leaving and suing him for various forms of abuse. They signed legal affidavits that are now online. You have a mass defection of people leaving the headquarters in Espanola. And so when you put these histories and you line them together, there suddenly seems to be a much more practical, urgent, and I would say perhaps sinister reason for having the remaining members that are loyal to you having their children literally halfway around the world. If you want to leave, good luck. I've got your kids. And so this, again, points back to dissimulation. Why would things like this happen? Why would people stay despite abuse? Why would people be involved in such illegal schemes to generate money? Again, this is the idea of dissimulation, of what is presented to the public might not be what people understand in private and among themselves. So when you look at public documents, you have Yogi Bhajan as just a good teacher, a man who knows a lot and is helping a lot of people. Internally, you have Yogi Bhajan as a person of power with sacred technology, hidden secrets that can do marvelous magical things. You take it further and further, you have Yogi Bhajan as a site worthy of veneration and devotion, and you have him as part of this sacred plan of history to have true Sikhism take root in the West. So, say that what kind of conclusions can we make about 3HO? I would say that perhaps the best conclusion to make is many conclusions and no definitive one at the same time. To recognize that 3HO can concurrently be many things depending on where we're looking, what participants we're talking to, and perspectives were within the group. Different scholars have had different ideas. Jacob says perhaps 3HO is a new religious movement, pejoratively known as it. Perhaps in part it can be seen as a criminal organization. Perhaps it can be seen as another New Age group in the American metaphysical milieu. And perhaps it is also key to not discount that some members, through their own experiences, actually sincerely believe that they are engaging in a form of Sikhi and are tied to a wider Sikh community. I personally, through my other interests, like to connect 3HO and see it as part of an earlier history, which is the history of early American yoga. So we have about 3,000 Punjabi Sikh migrants to the U.S. during the early 20th century. Statistics tell us that we have, at the time, that the majority are working in farms and mills. We have some merchants and traders. We have a lot of university students right around this part of California. We also have records that say that about 1% of all South Asian immigrants to the U.S. were making a living as a swami or yogi. The reason for this is actually very simple. In this time in America, with so many restrictive laws and discrimination, it was very difficult for many South Asian immigrants to find appropriate work. At the same time, you also have this bizarre American fascination with all things Indian and Eastern. So what do you do if you're Bhagat Singh Thind and you have a PhD in philosophy? Or what do you do if you're Bhagwan Singhyani and you're a Granthi and you can't get employed even though you're brilliant and you're capable? You take the show on the road and you make a living the best way that you can, like an immigrant, like a social around the country. And this is in fact what we see. We see people like Wasan Singh traveling around the country, teaching around the country, and kind of like dissimulation, presenting their own backgrounds as educated people, as people who had worked or well-read in psychology, presenting themselves as mystics to an audience. We have Bhagwan Singhyani of the Gutter Party, we have Rishi Singh Gurwal, another Punjabi Sikh, and these are two display ads of them making a living and doing the best that they can in the 1930s. And I think perhaps this is the best lens through which to view Yogi Bhajan, an opportunist who saw a market and saw possibilities and took advantage of them. But unlike these predecessors, it grew into something much larger, kind of the dumb luck of being in the right place at the right time. And an interesting side note, Bhagwan Singhyani of the Gutter Party, he taught a thing he called humanology, which is also what Yogi Bhajan calls a lot of his teachings. And coincidentally enough, Bhagwan Singhyani's grandson worked with Yogi Bhajan at Delhi Airport before he came to the U.S. and launched himself as Yogi Bhajan, teaching humanology. So very quickly, going to wrap up the so what questions. Why is this important? Why should we have a deeper, more nuanced, complicated understanding of 3HO Sikhs? A simple one, I would say, is that they have a disproportionate influence. For a group that numbers no more than 2,000 or 3,000, they garner a lot of attention and kind of sway the American public's understanding of what Sikhi is. So for that case alone, so that the public doesn't think that Guru Nanak's teaching was music is my religion, it's important to understand 3HO. And as two of my colleagues have suggested, and it's perhaps one of the more interesting kind of routes to go down, Van Dussenberry, an anthropologist who studied 3HO in the 70s and 80s, he said that very interestingly, a lot of second and third generation Punjabis in diaspora are in the same position that the early American converts to 3HO were, that they are part of traditions and communities, but they feel slightly detached from them. They're looking for practices, they're looking for understanding. And another colleague, Jasjit Singh in the United Kingdom, was suggesting 3HO has actually filled that role, and Kundalini Yoga has filled that role to a shockingly large degree in the UK. If you want something to do, if you want to connect with your faith, and you're tired of the old Granthi yelling at you at Gurdwara on Sundays, this is something that's a lot more approachable. And I would offer one little thing to illustrate potentially how volatile and interesting and important this kind of miscommunication or like this bizarre history would be, and that would be with the 3HO teaching that the soul does not enter the fetus until the 120th day of conception. 3HO teaches this as a widespread, sacred Sikh tradition that is held and that has been done in the Punjab since time immemorial. And you see this advertised, and it's actually a beautiful thing. Why wouldn't we stop and celebrate and honor a pregnant woman? Why wouldn't we stop and honor a child who is going to be coming into the world? It's the other side of that, is that Yogi Bhajan says that abortion is totally fine up until the 120th day because there is no soul. It's just flesh. It doesn't matter. And this is in conflict with a lot of Sikh teaching. And can you imagine an idea like this spreading in parts of India where it's okay, you don't have to worry about it. The Sikh holy man says there's no consequence if abortion is done within the first 4 months. And why did this teaching come about? Why did Yogi Bhajan teach it? Again, going back to the hidden history, you have as far back as 1970 records of Yogi Bhajan forcing female students that he had inappropriate relations with to terminate pregnancies, and one who sued 3HO for being coerced into being sterilized. So perhaps the stakes are much more than a curious and strange history. Thank you.
thank you, Philip, for taking on a project in America, and you kind of took us through a sinister underbelly to of 3HOs. Start the question portion of the panel, so I'm going to invite all the panelists to come up here. Okay, so I have a couple questions, and then I will open it up to the audience. My first question is for Simran. So you kind of talked about how numerically and empirically these conceptions of sex selection in India do not manifest here. I wanted to ask if are the numbers hiding anything? Are they not do they not capture everything that's going on? Are those notions not here? That kind of thing, or like what do you think has changed from India to here, and what influences those numbers?
Hello? Is this on? Okay. That's a really good question. Yes, the numbers don't translate, and we see that in the statistics. I don't think that means that that it's not happening. And if you sort of look even more into the statistics, you see that your ratios kind of tend to move a little bit if the first two children are females. So I think that I don't know if they're heading in any direction, but I do think it's a problem. I think that son preference is very strong in our communities, despite what our religion teaches us. This is a reality that we live with. Yeah, it's a good question, but I think sort of what I was trying to convey is that that banning abortion for the purpose of sex selection is not the solution. I don't know what the solution is. I think, like I said, it's starting earlier in thinking about the role of women in our culture, starting earlier than the pregnancy. So that is the question. Thank you for asking it.
My next question is for Mandeep. You touched on this a little bit at the end of your presentation about the cycle of disempowerment. I wanted you to expand a little bit more upon whether you feel like you've broken away from that cycle. If so, how that happened for you, and if not, why not?
Hello? That's a really good question. So I really believe in education, as I talked about, as a ladder of social mobility, and as a person who has gone to poor performing public schools in New York, but also have gone to some of the most elite institutions of education. I've seen and experienced that importance. And so for me, I feel like I've had the privilege to attend schools where I'm challenged in ways that a lot of other youth aren't, have opportunities to study abroad and intern and things that are not readily available. So in a lot of ways, yes, I feel like I have broken through the cycle of disempowerment. But just one aspect of that and that's the education. The gender norms, the cultural issues, a lot of the environment that exists, that is something that's very much part of my life that I still live in, and I still have to deal with in terms of what I want to do in the future. Like, I would love to go back to Richmond Hill and just do nonprofit work and work with youth and get involved with politics. But at the same time, I do, as a male, like in Punjabi traditions, I have to support my family. I have to do these other things to make sure that we're financially stable. So these are a lot of these different things that, even though I graduated from Columbia and did well there, there's so many other issues and intersectional challenges that I still continue to face, even though I tackled that education aspect.
Okay, and finally for Philip, in your interviews with 3HO6, did you get a sense of how 3HOs kind of like regard and think of themselves in juxtaposition, I guess, with Punjabi Sikhs?
I think the relationship between 3HO6 and Punjabi Sikhs has gotten better over time. When Van Dussenberry, who I mentioned, was studying 3HO6 in the 1970s, it was incredibly contentious. You go back to magazines at the time, there was just a vicious and nasty back and forth. And it's essentially a lot of 3HO Sikhs wagging their fingers at Punjabi Sikhs in the diaspora saying, what's wrong with you? Your kids cut their hair. You drink. We don't. We get up early in the morning. We say our bunnies. And it's this very kind of castigating thing, which sounds, I mean, it is this kind of form of chauvinism, but when you go through 3HO materials and you look at the lectures that Yogi Bhajan's giving and what's being taught and how they understand themselves, there was very much this, not even implicit, often spoken thing that there's this whole tradition of Sikhism. It includes yoga, it includes all these things. The Punjabis have lost that tradition. It's a cultural thing, it's a tribal thing. You, the rare few, have gotten these secret traditions, this like sacred science, and you're the holders of it. And I mean, think about it, if you kind of alienated your family and you're living in an ashram making $5 a week, do you want to believe that you're kind of one of the rare few that is like the teleological end of Guru Gobind Singh's vision? Or do you want to think that you've been taken for a ride for the last 2 years? So there's this, these things that are given, and it makes sense that so many people would want to believe that. And I think it's almost, in a very weird way, I almost think like gambling tables in Las Vegas are a really great way to understand involvement in high commitment groups. The more that you're in the hole, the more that you've committed, the more that you want it to pay off and for it to turn around, which is, I think, why you have a lot of people in 3HO now who have been involved for 30, 40 years. Nothing is going to change. You know, they're going to ride that to the very end. And why it's so difficult for so many people who did leave in the 1980s to make those decisions and make those breaks, because they felt very foolish. And I think kind of tragically, I think especially to this audience, is different people gravitated towards different aspects of 3HO. Many people loved the promise or the idea of living communally. I just want to be with a community, be with a family, support each other. A lot of people said, I didn't really care for the yoga, I didn't really care for the organization, but I loved being a Sikh. I love Sikhi. And it was incredibly painful to hear people recount how they came to this realization of, this is the one thing I wanted to do with my life, and I realized for 20 years I was wasting my time. I could have been learning Punjabi. I could have been learning to read Guru Granth Sahib, and instead I'm doing all of these weird things that have nothing to do with what 99.9% of Sikhs around the world understand to be their faith.
I'm now going to open it up to the audience if you have a question.